Hello and welcome to our audience here at the BCS office in Moorgate, and to those who are joining us remotely through the wonders of the modern technology. So welcome to the BCS Business Change group, and today we're going to learn how Boots IT adapted to support the Boots pharmacy response to the pandemic. So that title exactly summarises the purpose and intent of the Business Change Specialist Group. Especially pleased to have Boots here. Boots are one of the BCS organisational members, and we have a panel of 4 speakers whose names I will just list, but they will introduce themselves as we proceed. So we've got Michelle Kearns, Gareth Elliott, John O'Donnell and Andrew Watkins. Now Boots, of course, is a name that we've all known forever. 1849, so it must have been a fair amount of business change occurring regularly throughout that, and yet it's a name we still see on the high street and the first choice to go when we've got colds. And back in my youth used to buy on the camera film and all the rest of the stuff from there as well, which again is another example of change that has just gone, that we now use our phones for all of that. The synopsis of the meeting invite says that Boots was able to support Government and NHS through initiatives such as COVID tests and vaccinations. We've just heard recent announcements suggesting that there'll be relaxations of all those things. So in that extent, Boots has probably not just helped the Government and NHS, but helped all of us. So anyway, without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers. And I will run to the back.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Warm welcome to everybody who's made it this evening, really appreciated, and to everybody who's online at the moment. My name's John O'Donnell, I'm the Technology Director for Healthcare Technology at Boots. Andrew, who's one of our delivery managers, but is also a trained pharmacist, so he can relate to what it's like in the store. Gareth is one of our enterprise architects who's helped us solve some of the problems. And we've got Michelle Kearns, who heads up our Irish operation here, and actually sitting in the audience is our former head of engineering, Steve Westgarth, so there might be a few questions coming in. Today's presentation is really focused on a couple of things. Is that like most organisations that suffered significant disruption through the pandemic, Boots is in a unique situation where actually Boots is in a unique position where we are actually a primary healthcare provider. We really work closely with the NHS about maintaining healthcare across the high streets and our store operations. Gareth's going to give you a little bit of update about Boots, who we are, what we do, just in case you don't know who Boots are, and I'll explain a little bit more about the context in terms of how we've operated through the pandemic.
But Boots holds quite a unique position in the UK and Ireland from a market perspective. And so we've got 2,200 stores across the UK, 91 stores in Ireland, with additional 550 optician practices and 533 hearing care locations. Also interestingly, 85% of the UK population are within 10 minutes of a Boots store. So that just goes to show that we're quite sort of on the corner of a lot of the high streets, but really close to where people live as well. We employ around 51,000 people, 20,000 of those work within sort of our healthcare profession, with 5,600 registered pharmacists as well. We dispense approximately 16 million prescription items every month. And also our scientists developed ibuprofen, and also our scientists came up with the 5-star UVA rating that we have on some lotions. So that's some of the Boots things that Boots have developed for everyone else.
We're also going to talk a little bit about our pharmacy services. As Boots traditionally been a pharmacist on High Street, the range of our technical digital channels were quite limited. We offered a range of probably 4 online channels if you wanted, say, acne support or hair loss. Those were typically the standard things we may do online, but they were limited scale. So we've effectively went through a real explosion period of building new channels to try and protect patients and offering different means of accessing that. And that's including online, in-store, and also buying prescriptions. We'll also talk a little bit about our practice management systems, but all of this is really underpinned about the technology. A lot of it comes with monolithic traditional systems that are very limited in their ability to expand, and also to meet the growing needs of the business on new channels. So we've actually had to create new ways of working through our operating model. So today we're kind of going to take you through all of that, and I'll quickly get back onto the slides now and try and get us back on track. Right. Okay. Okay, so kind of briefly touched about Boots' role at the heart of the community. We are the biggest pharmacist chain in the UK, but equally we are one of the biggest partners within the NHS about primary care. So through the course of the pandemic, people may not be aware of it, but a lot of the initial test centres were actually set up by Boots UK on behalf of the UK Government in partnership with the NHS. We trained up the military. I don't know if you remember on the news, the military was at the test centres. Boots were there at the forefront, training the staff up to try and also train up the NHS to go at mass scale that we could actually set up the test centres. The team are going to kind of talk a little bit about the work that we did there. Also, we've talked about some of the business channels earlier on, the online channels. We're going into a lot more detail there. But also, all of this, we still had to run our day-to-day business. So we've got a huge transformation on the tech side, but equally we've got a lot of other parts of the business, like our beauty, number 7, you know, international businesses we had to maintain during that time. So, the first thing we had to do was really do two things: protect the pharmacists, protect our supply chain networks, make sure that pharmacy prescriptions can flow through the UK. I'm sure you appreciate at the time there was lots of disruption through warehouses, supply chain networks struggling. The same goes for our business. We had to find dynamic ways to try and automate some of the workflows, protect our business by getting extra labour resources into it. Some of that directly didn't cause impact on IT, but it meant our systems had to rapidly change to be able to support a change in behaviour by the business. Kind of briefly touched on the NHS 111. This has actually led to a new service that the NHS is now establishing as a pharmacy service line, but Boots was there to start creating that right at the start, with 300 trained pharmacists to scale that up. So anybody who was struggling to try and access any services with the GP, I'm sure if you remember right, most people didn't want to stop the NHS, most people didn't want to impact the GP, but still needed access to the services. So we've set that up with the NHS, and we can go a little bit more detail for you. If you wanted to flip on to the next slide. So I will spend a couple of minutes talking about the tech elements and specifically about the Boots architecture. Feel free to ask any questions if you want to know more specifics about it, but typically at Boots we had really monolithic systems. We've been, as we had, 170 years of age. It does feel at times that our systems are that old, and we still have mainframe technologies at the heart of the way of working. So we've had to move really rapidly to try and get into cloud technologies to help us scale at pace and create new ways of working through agile methodology. So I'll give you a little bit more insight. So predominantly what Boots has made a decision to do is move our technical resources from really maintaining our services to really driving innovation, accelerating our digital agenda. We went through a large transition of services from in-house staff over to our third-party providers, but equally we've tried to modernise a lot of our infrastructure estate that's predominantly sitting in our legacy data centres to really IaaS, PaaS and SaaS services to try and get more flexibility, but really focus the Boots resources on accelerating our digital agenda. So our partners have really helped us massively accelerate in that space. Steve, who's in the room here, has actually helped us accelerate really the transformation of our software delivery. Typically across most of our core customer channels, with the exception of Boots.com, it's typically 2 or 3 releases per annum that will have a lot of functionality updates into that. And it will also include security patches, maintenance activities. However, to really get on top of the challenges facing us, how could we effectively refocus our teams from typically a waterfall methodology into really agile ways of working? We were up against it. We needed to find ways to accelerate it instead of standard governance channels. Typically, it would probably take 6 months to get a release from design into live. we need to find ways to do that within effectively a couple of weeks max. That was the aim. And later in the slides we'll talk a little bit about some of the suppliers who we partnered up with to help accelerate that. But in essence what it's established is a set of ways of working across our technology teams, the tools and the automation we had to put in place to be able to achieve that, but also the roles and accountabilities each of the teams have to be able to try and accelerate. A large part of this was also to try and move us more into the cloud. We moved a significant proportion of our business frontline applications from traditional data centres into Azure. Microsoft is our primary partner for cloud technology. That is highlighting probably areas where we've landed basically the application lifted into infrastructure as a service, but then we've had to modernise and really free up the application so we can get into more continuous delivery. So the examples the team will give you is about how we've leveraged those investments in the foundation technology to try and land some business change onto it. Also, we've had to really significantly change the core network. We have a lot of ADSL technology across our estate that was not going to be able to support our business through this huge transformation scale. As we move more into cloud, we need better capabilities, faster networks within our stores. So we've embarked on a multi-million-pound investment plan with the likes of BT to modernise the estate. So we're well underway to do that. That'll leverage 5G, better fibre networks in the stores. So as we digitise services in store, we're able to leverage some of that underpinning infrastructure. Okay. So we coined the phrase of rowing the boat faster. How do we make boats technology faster to what we've traditionally done to try and meet the challenges? So a large part of it is the solutions that you're here today is relied on our third parties to really come in to help accelerate our innovation. So as an example here, we've got Libby, who's helped partner our GP Connect services. So we've got online video conference facilities in store that can access a GP. We've also worked with companies like Lemonade who have been able to allow us to move effectively four primary care services that we typically had at Boots. We needed to scale up to about 45 through the pandemic. Our traditional methodologies would probably take us 18 months at best to develop that. We found programs of work where we can actually develop that within 12 weeks and turn that around at scale. Through companies like Recover, we were first to market on the high street building live testing and live vaccination services. So we were able to kind of turn that innovation around within about 4 weeks to try and help protect the high street patients. Massive support from the likes of TCS, freeing up, providing engineering development resources. Same with Cognizant. These were the partners that helped Boots get scale very quickly. Also, our standard methodologies today were, I'm sure you appreciate, we rely on a lot of offshore teams, but we also rely on a lot of engineers that go into our primary data centres to support testing activities within our data centres, especially any releases of new software. It was a lot of it was manually tested by an engineer at the end of it. So the fact is we can't simply get access to our buildings any longer. We may get access to your store, but we can't physically get into our IT departments. So how do we get access to our test labs? So we've effectively had to massively transform the way we automate testing to get that software through the pipeline faster than what we've done today. And this gives you a kind of snapshot view of the technology that's underpinning more automated testing, more automated deployment, more automated releasing of the software into the mix. So we can actually get those releases in faster than it's expected. One of the big things we're trying to do is also break up our monolith systems into more microservice architecture. But also, we've got new entrants of technology coming into our space. How do we open up our systems, allow those third parties to connect? So when it comes to access and log on for a patient, or checkout in baskets, or the boot branding and customer journeys, how do we make sure that that's seamless together? So we've had to really modernise our architecture behind the scenes. Outside that, we've also worked closely with our security teams. With this level of modernisation, how do you make sure that not only you're protecting the patient, but actually their data that comes to you, how do you make sure that's safe and secure as you're going through this large transformation? So we work very closely with the likes of Imperva, Fastly, to try and put the security architecture in place. So all of that's really allowed us over the last 20 plus months to try and offer a greater range of services to our patients, and hopefully the team here can walk you through what that looks like. So before I hand over, is there any questions in the room of what we've heard so far?
You've used the word innovation several times. Have you got but you haven't pointed out a research department or R&D? Have you got one?
Yeah, so we tend to have a mixture of different insight that's coming in. So first of all, we rely heavily on our technology providers. Equally, we've got Gareth, who's part of our enterprise architect team, who's looking really at the future business capabilities. But in reality here, a lot of this was about immediate response. It wasn't about 2-3-year plans about bringing that tech in. It was really about leveraging the insight of the likes of Microsoft, the healthcare IT industry, about the tech that we can bring into Boots. But some of that was also about exploiting the capabilities we've got today to try and create that channel. Traditionally, we do have an innovation department, and Gareth and the team help support bringing that insight. But in this space, we needed to move faster than typical.
Thank you.
Gareth, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's spot on. I think it was a very reactive approach we had to take because there was immediate demand and immediate need. So we had to move really, really quickly because it wouldn't go through the traditional process it would be previously. But we had to deliver the new innovation at pace.
The reason I ask is that established companies and universities, at one point they move into research at the university or at the company, and my question usually would have been, when did it start? Because I'm trying to find out, was there a time during the progress, was it early 1900s, was it 1935, was it during the war? You know, I'd just like to put my finger on that pulse.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's probably a couple of bits in my mind as you're asking the question. In a lot of cases, we just had permission to go and do stuff, and a large part of it was...
Oh, sorry, you weren't requested to?
So for example, we knew, let's say for argument's sake, we've got a patient's got cancer.
Yeah.
They need to come into a store to get their prescription. That is not practical. There's no way we would want our patients to be put at risk. So that's clearly a problem statement for us to work with. So what range of tech can that patient do online that gets the access to advice, gets the access to repeat prescriptions, then that prescription can come to their home. So for us, that was right. Okay, what range of tech do we need to go out to find that can support all those activities for the patient to protect them? We don't want them to come into what they may feel is a very unsafe place. So clear problem statement. We've also got other patients who really wanted to access a greater range of healthcare advice, but didn't want to trouble the pharmacist. They didn't want to trouble the GP. Clear problem statement. How do we offer that through a digital channel again, so patients can be protected? Through the pandemic, though, we've actually realised that there was a lot of secondary conditions and primary health conditions that people were not bringing to the forefront. So mental health, we talked about a lot today. We've got people who needed access to advice, and today there was very limited technology today to bring that together. So what I would say is our challenge is that we've gained such momentum. The challenge we've got is how do we use that as now the baseline of ways of working going forwards. There's a challenge that we will kind of revert back to our old standard innovation, take months to kind of move that forwards. We may struggle getting the funding. All of this takes time before an innovation can actually get into our business services. That was one of the strong opportunities we had here. We could smash through all that relatively quickly and accelerate it.
We do during our, we operate safe, agile, and we do encourage, as we go through the kind of the sprints, to reserve a bit of time for innovation for our development teams, just to have a bit of space, a bit of time with the business on an innovation, reserve that
Creativity.
time. So, yeah, that creativity is really key, and an enterprise architecture in our organisation also have a focus on future and innovation. So we do try and create space in amongst all of this for creative thinking. We've done some stuff with, I believe, with the kind of universities, etc., to try and drive
needs for the future.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and you know, as an organisation, as people within IT, we are always kind of looking out for innovation. Healthcare innovation is massive. So as a healthcare organisation, to keep our eye, to lose sight of what's going on in innovation in healthcare would be problematic. We've got to be on the ball with that. We need to be upfront with that, and we need to be changing at the pace that the NHS and our customers expect. And you know, one thing through the pandemic, people's expectation of healthcare has changed, and I think it has changed forever in terms of using technology to access healthcare. So one thing coming out of that, we've got to keep on top of that. We can't just take that for granted. We need to create space in our organisation for that change.
Yeah, it's a good point you're making there, because you know, typically we'll use other things like hackathons to try and get insight.
Sorry, didn't catch that.
Hackathons. So we give IT teams distinct business problem challenges. Let's say, right, yeah, you've now got permission to build a bit of tech through either a mobile app or an online digital channel or a piece of services that's going to help our store colleagues. And that's the way we keep our engineers fresh about business problems, to try and turn that around in very short, very focused pieces of work. What we don't want is programs of work to run on for 10 weeks. We want pieces of work that are going to deliver value within 2 weeks. So that's part of the culture. Steve, you?
Yeah, I just think the word innovation in this context is a really interesting word to kind of throw around, because what is innovative at Boots, and transforms the organisation and allows it to accelerate, might not be innovative at all in a different organisation. So if you think about a startup culture, for example, that might be operating continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines and all of their code, where literally a developer commits code and to get in within half an hour or even less in some cases, it's live in production. That technology is available today, and that is innovative. And you can kind of look at the industry and say, well, that's what we should be doing at Boots. But in a Boots context, you've got to take that at scale and say, well, we are trying to adapt to what we're doing. We're trying to serve the customer at scale. And is that too risky for us? So if we do that, are we going to put our patients at risk as a result of doing those sorts of things? So I think a lot of innovation in this context is about looking at what the wider IT industry is doing, and then seeing how we can take that practice and adapt it within our organisations to do that. And I think that is where the real challenge for organisations like Boots really is, because you've got such a requirement to, as John was talking about there, deliver value quickly for the customer, but to do it in a way that is safe, that doesn't put patients at harm or at risk, and allows the company to stay trading. I mean, it would be, if a small e-commerce site goes offline, it's probably a problem, but if Boots.com goes offline, it literally costs the business millions of pounds. So it's about having that risk-averse attitude, while still adopting that wider innovation that is in the wider IT community, the IT sector. Without necessarily, that doesn't necessarily involve innovating yourself, although it might feel innovative within the company, in the context you're working with.
The sort of innovation I'm interested in is, can you use growth hormone with stem cells?
Yes, that's different type of innovation.
Hasn't tried yet?
Produce a vaccine in 6 months. That's innovative.
Right, gents, shall we get into some of the stuff that we've kind of done? Oh, sorry, one more question.
Very quickly, because my background is kind of in target operating models. Did you actually do any kind of rehearsals through business continuity planning that might have prepared you for the pandemic?
Yes, indirectly, but most of them were never about major sustained period of time. So I'll give you an example. So we had DR plans in place about our offshore teams if they weren't able to continue work. But what we didn't have plans for is, this was unfortunate, where we had major deaths within our IT teams, or swathes of technical teams were unable to work for prolonged periods. We had to adapt very quickly to get the infrastructure in place. We did have plans about our data centres, we did have plans about our application support. I would say we're very fortunate that actually over the course of a few days we had the business up and running, fully trained, with the technical teams in place. However, what we had was unusual scenarios like our opticians business. I'll look after that as well, but actually opticians, you think eye care would be right at the forefront for healthcare in the UK. In the first pandemic it wasn't. We had to close pretty much all of the stores down, bar 58. We had never tested scenarios like that, so we had uniquenesses coming in that meant we had to create new plans there and then.
Oh, okay, brilliant, thank you.
And we had a lot of situations where, I mean, there's a massive need to work remotely, and not everyone had laptops. So just even just some of the basic things about getting laptops and headsets for people and make sure that Teams installed was a real challenge at the time. It was a real challenge, but we managed to get through that, particularly because I mean, even getting hold of laptops, there's a shortage, national shortage of getting hold of laptops.
Sure, yeah.
But we managed to work through that quite quickly, to be fair.
See, give you an example of some of the scenarios we never factored in. So things like our online pharmacy items dispensing, the growth was absolutely astronomical. It was like 1,000% growth. We didn't have the physical space. We didn't have the staff to be able to support that volume. The services were breaking. How do we stabilise that? So we had scenarios that we just had to kind of work through, re-engineer buildings, re-engineer processes within the teams using Lean Six Sigma. All of this was rapidly running at the same time whilst trying to protect stores.
Brilliant.
Right.
Awesome. So I'm going to just pick up on something that John's already touched on around the NHS 111. So what we're going to do now is take you through some examples of stuff we actually did to bring it to life. So if you've got any questions as we go through this, please shout it out. So one of them was NHS 111. So as you can imagine, for those who don't know what NHS 111 is, it's the kind of the non-emergency phone line for the NHS. So, you know, if my child's got a spike in temperature and I'm worried, I pick up the phone, call 111 and they give me the right advice and triage me through. Now obviously when the pandemic hit, NHS 111 was under massive pressure. So calls were going through the roof, they didn't have the people was isolating. It's generally run by nurses. Nurses were required elsewhere, obviously. So we kind of spotted this quite early on in the pandemic. We've got thousands of highly trained pharmacists in our stores. Right, I'm one of those people, so I can say that. But it's an untapped resource a little bit in many ways in our country, and this is speaking as a pharmacy professional. It's an untapped resource, so we know that. So very quickly we got into conversations with the NHS and said, hang on a minute, you've got a problem here. We can see this problem. We've got a potential solution for you. We have pharmacists obviously still working in stores because all our pharmacies remained open as an essential service. Although we did have obviously pharmacists who couldn't go into work, were shielding, people who were self-isolating, people who had to look after families. So these pharmacists were basically at home with no kind of real meaningful work to do and an untapped resource. So we had plenty of conversations with the NHS and said, wouldn't it be a good idea if we could take these pharmacists with all this clinical skill and kind of connect them into your 111 service? Give them the right training, give them the right ability, but connect that in. So we started conversations really early with the NHS, and IT were central to that. You know, this wasn't just a kind of business thing done over in the business. We've worked hard as an organisation to make sure IT is embedded into business change. Right, this is something we're quite passionate about. I'm a former enterprise architect. Business architecture is kind of my thing, and so I'm really quite passionate about making sure IT is embedded in that thinking. And this was a great example of the business team coming to us and go, we've got this problem, IT. We kind of think we've got some solution, but can you help us with this? So we went into a project mode, rapid action team, wrapped that around with the right IT resource, had plenty of conversations with the NHS, and in a matter of days we had identified a solution, identified the kit we needed, identified the training we needed, identified the access we needed to give our pharmacists. And within a matter of days, we had up to 100 pharmacists plugged in to NHS 111, was it 111, taking calls from people who were really quite, stressed. They've tried their GP, they've tried to get help, and our pharmacists were able to triage those people, give them some advice, calm it down, direct them to the GP if needed, direct them to A&E if needed, and it really kind of played on our strength as an organisation. And IT was essential for that. We had to provide the kit, we had to provide the kind of headsets, the telephony for our staffs. And it was really successful. We have nearly 100 pharmacists taking calls, almost 24/7 through the height of the pandemic. And it set a benchmark actually, because now there's a national service called the Pharmacist Clinical Assessment Service. So what's kind of span out of that is a recognition by the NHS, well, actually that is quite a good idea to do that. And what we're seeing now is that being almost recognised and rolled out as a service across the country. So me as a pharmacist, I'm quite proud of that one, because it really did change our relationship with the NHS, we're here to help you. B, our relationship with our customers, we can do more for you. And C, our profession, we're an untapped resource in pharmacy. Given the right training, given the right kit, given the right connectivity, we're able to make a real change. So I'm hoping that's going to be a real successful story going forward, and it just shows the power of just a little bit of IT connecting things up. It's not all about IT, it's about that business change, but you need that IT, you need the technology know-how, you need the kind of the brains of us as technologists to make it all come about. That was what I'm quite passionate about. So.
And just to interrupt you there, we have a question that came in from Michael
Yeah.
W. What would you do differently next time?
What would we do differently next time? It's a very good question. I think let me come back to it later on when we've gone
Ooh,
through
we
it.
haven't stumped. Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, it happened so quickly. It happened so quickly. It was like a kind of a problem. We've got to deal with it.
Yeah. So we probably spent too much time talking about, would it be on Boots
Yeah.
infrastructure, would it be Boots applications, or would we use the NHS? So by the time we went through all the journey types, it's quite clear we just need to replicate and extend the NHS systems into effectively the pharmacy network. That allowed us to do that quickly. Otherwise, we were into quite large software rewrites to open up that. We probably spent a few days extra on that one.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think what we do differently is probably be even more pragmatic than perhaps we were. I think something we've learned through COVID is the value of pragmatism. We've got a clear strategy in IT, we've got a clear direction. Sometimes the COVID pandemic taught us, sometimes you just got to be pragmatic and deal with what you're facing in front of you and make the right decisions for that, knowing that we're going to have to do something to kind of sort it out afterwards. We sometimes as IT kind of strive for perfection, but in the COVID pandemic, we didn't have time for perfection. So, I learned that, and this was early on, would be, get to an answer much quicker, be pragmatic, don't try and strive for perfect. The most important thing here is to get these services landed for our customers and our patients.
Did you use same Azure deal? No.
In this instance, we didn't know. It was literally, we had a rapid action team, agile principles, right? So we kind of the idea of Kanban and kind of tracking actions through. Absolutely, we use that, but it was get the right people, meet kind of a couple of times a day, and just push it through as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it was quite extreme because in some ways we were trying to recover our workforce at the same time. So it was polite conversations with our colleagues saying, you're giving up your equipment, we're giving it to the NHS, we're deploying it to the NHS, come back in a week's time. And it was really just hand to mouth for a couple of weeks to get that taken.
Okay. No more questions?
Chat.
Good. So I think John's probably mentioned the online items explosion that we saw. So as you can imagine, when people went into pandemic, people are concerned about getting access to medicines, right? People need medicines to live. You know, people with long-term conditions need these medicines to live. And I think, as John said, it wasn't just about toilet rolls. It was about, well, how do I get my medicines? I've got to be told to stay at home. I can't go out, or I'm worried, or I'm sheltering. How do I get my medicines? Now, we've been working for a while using some of our kind of microservices architecture and our safe, agile approaches. We've built a digital prescriptions service. Now, this means as a customer, as a patient, I can go online, I can order my prescriptions that I need from my doctor. And we build digital integrations with NHS systems to allow this, to make sure you're only ordering the things that you need to order and your doctor has authorised that. So we've been building that for a kind of a year or so before the pandemic hit. And actually what we found is, as John said, all of a sudden we're kind of facing into 1,000% growth pretty much overnight. So we had to really quickly adapt our ways of working. For the online dispensary, we had to build a dispensary in the Midlands. So that basically we've got a building in kind of one of our stores in Leicester where all the orders come into, we process them, get them out for at-home delivery. But with 1,000% growth, we were struggling because we hadn't even envisaged that level of growth. We didn't have the space to do that. We didn't have the people to do that. We didn't have the technology or the terminals to do that. So we had to work really quite hard and really quite quickly. We had to make changes to the property to make more space. We had to look at all our processes that we were delivering and re-engineer those. We looked at efficiency. We brought in some RPA as well into that process. So how do we speed up all our processes? Because every action, every minute really counted because we were going through such a big peak of growth, and it was quite a difficult time for us to kind of bring that back. But again, we had to work with the business. We had to work rapidly. We used some of the agile principles. We had to rethink about some of our processes for approvals. So, we've got quite a rigorous approval process, as you would expect in Boots. But sometimes, as I said, during the pandemic, we had to play the game in front of us, to coin a phrase, and actually we had to break through some of those barriers and change our ways of working to make this stuff actually happen.
So an example would be customer phoning up to understand where their prescription is, where in the delivery cycle is. Our call centre was never scaled to any level, and to increase the capacity, we needed agents, but we needed the tech to do that. The problem was it was going to take us weeks to get new phone systems to upgrade. So we effectively had to redesign our core network to be able to do remote calling, add a remote call centre capability, and working closely with BT. Within a week, we've created that and established a network where we could take thousands of calls per day beyond the couple of hundred that we're working through, and that allowed the business to reach out to the patient and give them confidence that medication was on the way. So it's that range of tech beyond just the application usage that we had to provide into the business.
And I'll let Michelle talk about that robot thingy.
We went all out in Ireland, so we did. We actually installed a dispensing robot in our flagship store in Liffey Valley. And I suppose a lot of the time people are like, well, will the robots take over from the humans? Will they do the human work? But I suppose against the backdrop of the pandemic and all the problems that both John and Andrew have discussed, what we wanted to do was see if we put in this robot, would it actually help us? Would it make things more efficient? Would it make it faster? And what the robot actually does is you load it up with you can throw in a whole box of medications and it will sort everything out, and it will put it into shelves, and it will remember exactly where all the shelves are, and it will go through that process. So rather than having a pharmacist stocking shelves, it will do that for you. And then as you start dispensing, it starts to learn. So drugs that you dispense more often, it will move closer to the dispensing chute. So it does this all automatically. So it will actually, if there's a drug beside the dispensing chute that isn't dispensed that often, it will actually take it out and move it somewhere else further away and move the other one back in. So it's really an incredible process to see. And then in the middle of the night, it will go and dust the shelves for you as well. So, but I did find out that dusters themselves cost a solid fortune. So, yeah, it's quite impressive to see, because I suppose the big thing for us was, will it actually free up time, or then there is that problem of, will it be difficult to load? Will the drugs get stuck? What happens if patients are waiting and something goes down? But thankfully to date, we've not had those problems, and anything that we've encountered have been simple things to get over. But the big difference that the pharmacists have noticed is they've more time to actually speak to the patients now. So rather than just, oh, here's your drugs, off you pop, they're actually getting that time that they've never had before to engage with the patient, to speak to them about other concerns that they have and different things like that. So it was really, really interesting, and something now that we're looking to expand throughout our other pharmacies as well. Yes.
So pharmaceutical dispensing has been heavily regulated historically. Obviously, it's really important we give the right drugs to the right patients. How have you found going onto the journey of taking your regulators and your people who are interested in the technology to a world where a machine is doing this for you, and we're now relying upon the machine to get that dispensing right? That's a big shift in attitudes between we must manually check this prescription to, hey, we're fully reliant upon a robot doing that dispensing for you.
I think a lot of bags were opened and names were checked for the first week. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you always do have your checks and your second checks in there as well. But I think it was a long engagement process, and the robot is a BD Rower robot. So they would have engaged with the business and with different stakeholders and addressed any of those concerns. And I think it was something that, people had to see it for themselves as well, because definitely there was it is that fear of change and what's going to happen and what's going to be done differently. But I think once I suppose it is building that trust with the business as well, and once they trust you as either an IT department or someone who's going to deliver something like that, you have that say of saying, well, this will work, and these are the reasons it has worked. And it goes back to we mentioned about the research element of what has gone before, what has worked before, have there been problems before. And I think if you can address all those concerns and create that environment where people can ask the questions rather than just going, no, it's fine, it works, because I think if you do that, you don't have that transparency. But if you actually create that thing where people, and even in rooms like this, when you say feel free to ask questions, people are nervous and they don't want to. But I think with business stakeholders, if you say, look, come to me separately, or you can kind of even see someone really has a burning question but maybe doesn't want to ask, and just go through that process with them. And I think the more questions obviously that are asked, the better that you can go through. And if you get stuck, rather than just pushing it on the carpet, just say, right, I actually don't know the answer to that, but I will come back to you. So there was a lot of engagement with the business from that perspective. It wasn't just simple, the robot's going to do it, it's going to do it right. There was a lot that kind of went along with that too.
So Steve, there's probably a couple of stages in the whole dispensing journey that you can automate safely, because if you've seen, we're dispensing roughly 16 million prescriptions. If you think of the average prescription, I have 2 or 3 items in it. So one of the things about the robots, they actually really improve safety. It's dreadful to say this, but we do have challenges, things like the drug sounds like that or looks like that, and there's challenges with incidents with the wrong medication to be dispensed. Robot definitely helps reduce that significantly down. But if you've got a patient, say the health condition hasn't changed and they're getting the same repeat prescription for the rest of their life, you think we'd be able to automate that, but under the current regulations, there isn't a lot of flexibility. You have to go through and do the primary and secondary checks, and quite rightly so. But there's parts of that where we can improve. So we have a thing called EPS, which is the Electronic Prescriptions Service with the NHS. We have to do 8 stages of validation checks all the way through, and probably 6 of them you can automate. So if you think about it, if we're doing 16 million prescriptions per month, and we could automate that, that really enriches the conversation between the pharmacist and the patient. And that's really what this robot's all about, to try and free up that time to have a better conversation.
And pharmacists as a profession, as again, I can say this because I am one, are very much evidence-based, right? So if you can prove to me, without with reasonable doubt that machine is as accurate as a dispenser or more accurate than a dispenser, as a pharmacist, I'm okay with that. What you're also always going to have, well, I say always, for now, is a pharmacist who is responsible and making clinical decisions over and top of a robot. The robot makes sure X equals X and it's the right prescription, it's the right number of tablets. The pharmacist is the person who's responsible for the clinical care and can intervene at any time.
I mean, one of the scenarios, not incorrect dispensing, but incorrect prescription. You know, the instances where the doctor may prescribe incorrect drug, and where the pharmacist would sort of challenge that. Where if it's all automated, there's no sort of intervention.
But that's where the pharmacist can add more value. And to Michelle's point, take out those tasks which could be done by IT and tech. Let the pharmacists do their role with the kind of healthcare side of it, their clinical expertise, the care of the person as a whole.
Yeah, but there is a risk that engagement disappears, because if it's all automated, no pharmacist is going to be sort of like, you know, looking at the prescription and saying,
well, no, the pharmacist will still look at the prescription and the robot will then dispense it. So the pharmacist still has that interaction, because they do have to actually go through those checks to say, are you Michelle Kearns, is this right for you now? And as you said, some people with repeat prescriptions to come back in and see it. Pardon?
Might not be in stock.
Well, yes, exactly, yeah. So no, there is still that.
It does make you wonder how far you could push that boundary, though, because if you think about bot technology and kind of your automated chatbots and those sorts of things, you know, and how they can have an interactive conversation with you as if it's a human that you're talking to, you know, to what extent could you train the bot to be able to replace the human? Whether you'd ever want to go that far, you know, there's a big ethical dilemma within that space, I guess.
Exactly why I kind of stopped myself when I said ever. Thinking that through, what does that mean? But there are ethical, there are ethical, moral debates to be had in that space. But you know, who knows?
And bearing in mind, before the pandemic in Ireland, we didn't have electronic prescribing. We still don't have it as such. But we didn't have the what you have in the NHS, where you have your unique health identifier and you can go and you can get your code. And we don't have that in Ireland, so we have no unique health identifier. We have one, but the government have it stored away somewhere and just haven't quite shared it just yet. No, it is a work in progress, but it's something that when the pandemic hit, we just had our normal prescriptions, but then all of a sudden they said, okay, GPs can now use secure mail to email prescriptions. And that was huge for us, because we had to change the legislation, we had to change the way everything works. But again, it's that thing of, it had to be done quickly, it had to be done to accommodate people. So we changed the whole way that worked. And when people talk about electronic prescribing now, if you ask a GP, they'll say, but sure, we have electronic prescribing, we can send it via an email. Not realising that there's a whole other back end to that, which is completely different. What you're doing is just emailing a script at the moment. Electronic prescribing obviously is so much more difficult, so much more complicated. But it's amazing, just because again of the pandemic, they went in, they changed the legislation. This has been in the works for years and years in Ireland, but had never gone anywhere. But when it had to be done, it had to be done.
I guess is that same sort of to your sort of, you know, overarching strategy of what you want to do in terms of moving to microservices and moving to the cloud. I'm sure that strategy must have existed way before pandemic. It's just that it accelerated that. It opened up the doors, signed the business cases, etc., to make it happen.
Partly, I would say a lot of the software we've typically built ourselves. We have our own software engineering centres over in Italy and India and Nottingham. What we probably didn't expect to is how do we create a more integrated ecosystem with the NHS, with other third-party providers to build probably what we class as best as breed tech and plugging that together. Our systems were never designed to be that open, and that was a sudden shift in strategy to do that.
But it plays to that point about innovation, though, because, you know, if you think about an open API ecosystem, you know, that is where the world is kind of very much moving to, where, you know, each individual organisation develops its own APIs and then says, yeah, use our data, use our systems, you know, connect together using that common interoperability standard. And I guess that's where organisations like Boots have historically maybe struggled, because we've very proprietary, it's our data, it's our innovation, whereas actually the industry as a whole I think is becoming much more open and connected.
So moving to more of an ecosystem, recognising that you're just
Absolutely.
one, maybe a
You're
big
one
cog, but
part.
you're a cog
Yeah.
or it's a
Absolutely.
bigger, bigger service chain.
And that's particularly true in healthcare tech, because you can't just do, when you're thinking of a person's health, it's very much holistic. The GP will have some information, the pharmacist will have some information, the hospital will have some information. So if you really want to look after a person holistically as a whole, you've got to be more open. You've got to share data with the NHS. You've got to share data with GPs and vice versa. Otherwise, you can never really care for somebody end to end.
Did you find your way of prioritising what you were going to do needing to change? And were there some things that you said, oh, this sounds a really good idea, but then you started it and you actually said you decided to stop because there are other priorities?
I think it's a good question. It probably shifted a mindset change in IT about the prioritisation. So we would say typically our capacity was X size of projects, number of sprints, story points, and it was a bit like, we can't simply survive with that model. We will never deliver the end services quick enough. So how do we sort of scale up? It's probably the way we looked at it. How can we get this outcome landed within 12 weeks? Who do we need to partner? What needs to change in IT for that to land? And that was a fundamental shift the way we looked at it. More often than not, we would say, we've got a hopper of X projects with X developers on it, we'd be able to turn that over in the next 3 months. It was like, actually, we need to land 3 times that in 4 weeks. How do we do that? So we leveraged a lot of the partners to try and, in the tech, to try and accelerate that. As we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, we are back into that space again of, right, we haven't got infinite demand capacity. How do we make these software changes more affordable for the business?
There's definitely something around how we sort of broke down some of the governance channels as well. So we're quite governance heavy, I guess it's fair to say, as an organisation, because we're a big organisation. But it's really obvious that we needed to be able to accelerate some of these changes really, really quickly. We didn't necessarily go through that level of governance we probably have done previously. And also something like the decision-making process. I think we saw a massive shift in the decision-making process. But previously it would go through a number of iterations to make a decision, go to a number of different boards. And there's lots of a lot more delegation to the right people to make the decisions, and that really accelerated us through and helped us prioritise, working really closely with the business teams and IT, but helped us prioritise what we really need to focus on.
That's a really good point, actually. What was the things that limited our capacity? So Boots is a part of the WBA organisation. Walgreens is our pharmacist over in the States. So we have business unit governance, we have corporate governance to try and get any sign off for investment. That can take weeks. And typically to support those investment papers, you need probably a small Seven-Nation army of signatures from your CTO, your CIOs, and eventually your business leaders. And all of that, on average, would probably take us a couple of months to get through the approval processes. So you smash through that very quickly and get straight to the decision makers to say, architecturally, does it stack up? Does security compliance tier 2? Yes, it does. Can we support it? Yeah, it does. Have we got an engineering designer we can land fairly quickly? Yeah, move. And that was really the attitude we took.
So has that sort of relationship between the business and IT changed as a result of what you've been doing?
Yeah, significantly. Significantly. And probably for the better, I would say. It's actually really focused us on outcomes better and getting to value faster.
Yeah.
And more importantly, you can't do it all yourself. How do you leverage partners to help move that forward? And I think it's really opened us up faster as a technology function. In fact, so much so, our business have effectively given us more permission to spend more money on IT to continue and accelerate the digital agenda. Before that would be quite constrained in investments. But also what's highlighted is that the lack of flexibility in our systems, the way we, for example, data, really important in our business. We have very siloed channels where we don't enrich and use that data in the best way. An example would be if I'm a diabetic, if I knew that that patient was diabetic, I'd be able to offer them a free flu jab Today we've got nothing in our systems that would join that conversation up today. So that's what it's effectively hiding. It's kind of really rooted out the technical constraints and why it's holding the business back for us to be able to invest better to kind of break that technical debt, but also really drive those new channels forward a lot faster.
And the reality is when you're able to deliver things at pace, you get better relationships with your business, so they don't see you getting in their way. So being able to break through that has strengthened the relationship with the business, because they don't see IT as being cumbersome and expensive as they can do. We've proven through kind of COVID that it doesn't always have to be that way. I guess the challenge is how do we keep that relationship going, but also make sure we're making the right decisions with the right governance and the right strategy, and get that balance right, because you could quite easily pivot back to the other way, and we're just kind of in a place of where we're trying to get to a happy balance between those two things.
Probably the bigger thing that's changed in a lot of bits, because as a pharmacist we're very, very sensitive about software changes in our production systems, and I wouldn't quite say we gold-plated things, but we would test things to an inch of its life in every eventuality before we put it into live, and we've kind of got the business in a risk acceptance space to say it's not going to be perfect, 80% might be good enough for you to get that in. If you're prepared to wait the X weeks, we'll come back. Don't get me wrong, that comes with some challenges, because we might have a bit of technical debt along the way, and technical changes that we need to figure out how we retrofit at a point in time, but it's moving us forward. Well, without using my broader Scottish accent, we did start off with thinking, scratch the chins, oh, we can't do this, as a Star Trek analogy, saying, you want this in 3 weeks, crazy, we're never going to land it, but we found ways to do it. And the teams are now feeling energised to try and find ways to stick. Who wants to work on an 18-month project where we can work on things very quickly and drive value within months? That's really what we wanted to get to. All right, then you're on to the next one.
Right, so really it's about, one of the scenarios was how do we really support the NHS as part of the first lockdown, and we've sort of touched on some of these topics already as we've been through this conversation. We work really closely with NHS, and we obviously deliver a number of prescriptions, 16 million prescription items a month. We also deliver a lot of NHS healthcare services, so NHS flu vaccinations in our stores and new medicine services, so lots of NHS services. But this the pandemic really brought us to really close together, as we sort of touched on with the NHS 111 conversation and some of the other elements. To the extent that we're delivering, we're standing up mass vaccination centres, mass testing centres across the whole country. So we stood up 206 locations across the UK for PCR COVID testing, really to support the NHS. We were training the armed forces, we were training the army, and the army was going to come on board to help support that. During the first lockdown, when it was really apparent that the whole industry, the whole sort of healthcare industry was really struggling, the NHS was really struggling. So we worked at real pace to bring on some of these new solutions and new ideas into very much supporting the NHS. So we delivered 66 sites in England for COVID vaccinations within a very short period of time. 10 of those were, in addition, we included 10 temporary sites, which are outside of our normal store base, so some more pop-up locations just there to be closer to where the demand was. We did 50 sites in Northern Ireland. As John's already mentioned, we also used a lot of the NHS technology to deliver some of this. It wasn't just Boots technology, it was about how we use NHS technology, how we integrate into the NHS, and how we deliver some of that value really quickly. We've also touched on before about sort of bolstering the network support and making sure we've got the right networks and the right capabilities needed for stores to deliver some of these services. And some stats there, so we're taking somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 COVID-related calls per day into our stores and into our sort of support office. And the variation there is really based on when there's new announcements from the government. So as the government uses at the time release new announcements as to what it really meant, there's lots of questions, lots of queries, lots of people not really understanding what it really meant for them. And we're right on the front line taking those calls and supporting patients. To date we've administered about 5 million COVID tests and about 1.6 million COVID vaccinations as well. I've also supported with information on boots.com, so created sort of content and information. Our chief pharmacist was creating videos that have been patents.com, but also being emailed out to patients to better support them through some of those early days when there wasn't a huge amount of information about. We also implemented a number of technology solutions. So how we didn't have a COVID testing solution, we didn't have a COVID vaccination solution, we didn't really have integration into labs to be able to get the results, that information into labs to get the results back and then give it back out to patients so they can understand what the results were. So we had to implement really quickly, working with some of the third-party partners that we've always touched on, delivering technology solutions that were available for patients as well as in store to be able to manage some of those processes. There's a massive operational change from our in-store colleagues, and also within our team, to be fair. We also created a number of new online journeys. We had a really clear view as to what each of the different tests were. So you had your day 2 tests, your day 2 and 8, when you're going when you're travelling. We also had some rapid antigen tests available in store, so people could come in store and get results within 30 minutes. So a number of new technologies, a number of new solutions, a number of new innovations, I guess, that were implemented into stores really at pace, that required, and this is the time when the stores were going through lots of changes, lots of social distancing. We only had a number of patients in the customers in stores at a time, so we had to sort of go through all of that process and try and make sure the customers were safe and the store colleagues were safe, as well as implementing all this new technology. We also had to go through UCAS accreditation for some of the testing and vaccination services that we delivered through some of the technology, and again that took a number of months to go through. We really brought the business partnership and the IT teams really close together, and as I sort of mentioned before, it really brought us close together as a team and helped us do the prioritisation and helped us work effectively and create that sort of clear view in IT of what the customers and the business wanted. So I guess sometimes you can, within IT, we can, I don't know, I guess sometimes we can think we probably know what the business want rather than actually asking the business what they want. And this was a real eye-opener, actually going into the business and working really closely with them and understanding some of that sort of business architecture side of things and really understanding what we wanted as a business and how IT could really support that. And back to that cross-functional working with our IT partners and the horizontals, was really close together. Any questions? I'm conscious about the time. I've rattled through that quite quickly. Is there any sort of questions on sort of the COVID testing or the COVID vaccinations?
Probably the bit I would build on is we call it a Lumera device, which we use for the in-store testing. That technology we do plan to use further through our store business. It can do a lot more than just that one condition. It's about 50 conditions that we can pick up through that tech. So things like a diabetic, we can use that tech to try and test for patients. So that's an area where we're going to effectively build out a diagnostics business within the Boots organisation. But also a lot of this operational processes we use for the airline industry. I'm sure at the start, if you remember, who do I need to go to get a PCR test, the lateral flow test? I need to leave the UK, who do I go to? So we work very closely with all the premier airlines to try and give them our testing capability there. So it wasn't just the patients on the high street, this was about business to business capability alongside it.
Some of the equipment on view looks as if it needs calibrating. Does it get calibrated every...
It's a very good question. Yeah, so I don't know if you remember, it's part of the pandemic where a lot of companies were buying tech and face masks from different organisations, some were approved, some weren't. This equipment has to be regulated specifically on the test results that you provide back, because think about it, this was at a time when most people didn't actually have the first vaccination in the UK, so whatever these test results were, we were having to buy it, and yes, it's a regulated, approved, clinically checked piece of kit that we relied on. So we went through quite a robust process before we could actually use it.
And on the going back to the robot, does that get spot checked for
Oh,
efficiency?
yes,
or
yes,
not
yes,
making
yeah.
mistakes?
Yeah, no, it actually has KPIs that we check every week, and just to make, because I suppose one
So
of
is
the,
that once every 1,000 or 500?
it actually does, it generates automatic reports as well that are looked at once a week. Yeah, that are looked at once a week. But then,
Temperature.
yeah, because the big thing was as well, like obviously we wanted to prove that it was making a difference to the business as well, because we wanted more of them. I mean, who doesn't want more robots? So we had to make sure that we were really on top of that business case. So our director of pharmacy, Quiva Macaulay is her name, she's very on top.
Temperature sensitive.
Yeah, if you think about the original COVID, that
Yeah.
was temperature control. So we had to.
Issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were the first to kind of get Pfizer, then it became Moderna and AstraZeneca. So we had to constantly adapt our working environments to support whatever the storage requirements were.
I think one thing I would say on the kind of testing and the vaccinations, it has created potentially more permanent business change. So it kind of forced us to be on the front foot with vaccination services, on the front foot with testing services for a particular need, but there is hopefully a legacy of that within our organisation in terms of, well, what next? We've built a capability within an organisation to meet that specific need, but can we use that capability in another way? Can we expand that capability? Can we adapt that capability to make a lasting business change? Because it accelerated our thinking in those spaces and accelerated our where we think we could get to in our ambition in those spaces. So I think that's a lasting thing, driven by COVID, driven by the solutions we put in, but will last a bit longer than.
So how did you cope with Omicron hit and there was a shortage of LFTs?
Shortage of what?
Oh, sorry,
Lateral flow
flow
devices.
tests. Oh, just before Christmas, they ran out everywhere.
So the testing we did were kind of the PCR antigen antigen testing. The lateral flow devices, as a pharmacy and as a pharmacy chain, we were giving them out. But this particular testing was more about to support travel and opening up of travel and PCR. So where people wanted to get into venues, etc.
I think what I was getting at was that this pandemic has kept throwing curveballs.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's a real good point actually. One of the reasons where we used a company called Vocova is the legislation and the supply chain logistics processes constantly changed. An example would be, so using the lateral flow, we had regional areas where there was no tests, there was no lateral flow that we could do. So how do you bulk that regional area out so patients can't book it? And we also had scenarios where certain age groups became more vulnerable in the priority list. If you remember the debate about children versus 60-plus-year-olds, we had to manage all of that, constantly changing by government policy.
It even changed, I think it was announced in the news yesterday that the pharmacy is going to be the primary provider of COVID-19 jabs for the 5 to 11-year-olds. So again, that's another shift forward that we're going to have to change and adapt to. It's really interesting because you'll see, I mean, when we talk about the flu, we're using some of the mass vaccination centres we set up for COVID. As the demand sort of dropped off, we're then using it for flu because there's a massive increase in flu. But as the different age groups went through that process, you could see a peak. It's back down to sort of some of the IT systems having to sort of manage that peak, as I said before, 1,000+% increase in pharmacy items on the digital side within literally overnight.
So it's a good point about flu, because with most people being in very sterile environments, the NHS were very concerned about flu for this year. Yeah. So they really challenged pharmacy healthcare network to say, we need you to do as many vaccinations and jabs as possible. So we've effectively ramped up massively from, probably sub 1 million to well over 2.5 million. Yeah, 2.2. We were only able to achieve that volume through the core network we set up for the vaccinations, that we could actually then support the NHS on that.
Yeah, because there's definitely a shift, as we saw from the government, they're saying that they could get free jabs for over 50s, which was a bigger shift. And we saw, as John mentioned, we saw a significant increase in demand, which drove demand into our appointment diaries. So we've got an enterprise appointment booking system that had significant challenges around some of the capacity. and into the other systems as well. So for flu, we have very similar to digital pharmacy items technology. We have a technology stack for services. We developed a sort of bespoke application to meet the specific needs of flu and the specific needs of NHS flu, and also some of the private flu vaccinations as well. And it really meant into that sort of rapid provision of in-store hardware to make sure we've got the technology and the hardware in-store ready for delivery of these flu vaccinations, but also back to the logistics, make sure we've got the supply chain in place and we can get the right number of flu jabs into the right stores at the right time for the right patients to get the jabs into the vaccinations into their arms.
How big's your procurement department?
Good question. Overworked, I can imagine.
Yeah, so we rely on a company called Alliance Healthcare, who has a massive logistics department here, make sure the right product gets to the right store at the right time. But this was a real logistical challenge, because a lot of this is effectively temperature controlled. It's not stick it on a shelf and use it when you need it in 3 or 4 weeks. This is medication has very, very short shelf lives.
Yeah.
And to your point about curveballs, there were a lot of curveballs in flu. You know, supply issues is available for this age group. It's not available for that age group. I think one of the learnings we've taken from kind of this year's flu and the COVID stuff is how do we make our IT systems as flexible as possible in the right places. So if the business come to me, I need you to switch that off and turn that on, or change it to 60. Sometimes we weren't able to respond as quickly as we would have liked. So we're very much a focus on the technology being able to be adaptable and change really quickly. And we're putting a lot of work into some of our systems to make that happen, because that will stand us in good stead for next year, where the NHS gives us another curveball, or COVID gives us another curveball, or flu, or whatever. We need to be much more flexible in terms of how do we adapt quickly.
So this is a good example for me where the system probably changed 4 or 5 times through the course of a year. A booking engine is a booking engine, you think. Typically we're sitting in our data centre, the scale of volumes of customers hitting it was in the tens of millions that was accessed. Now we didn't have the horsepower in the data centre to cope with it. We tried to move it into an earlier slide I showed the Azure migration. We moved it in infrastructure in the cloud. That wasn't performing enough. The system was struggling under loads. We then modernised it. We had to then significantly upgrade it beyond its functional designs. And in the end, we ended up doing something like 130 tech changes to the architecture, to the application, constantly over the 2-year period to get it to the point where it met the customer's need and performing enough. But it was constantly evolving.
Yeah, plenty of curveballs we have to deal with.
Right, I think we've got one more slide left.
Couple more, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Same themes as we've been over, I think. This is a little bit about us recognising people were not able to access healthcare in a way that they were A, used to, or B, expected. And I'll pick out the Macmillan partnership one again, because that one for my part is really quite important. So Boots have got a partnership with Macmillan that's going to span a number of years now. And as you can imagine, when COVID hits, there's 3 million people living kind of with cancer, kind of 1,000 diagnosed kind of a day, I think, something like that. And these people are the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And the Macmillan partnership we have has trained up over 4,000 pharmacists to be what we call Boots Macmillan information pharmacists, or as it says there, BMIPs, because it's a bit of a mouthful. But they're a really, really important resource for us. They're there on the high street for anybody who's affected by cancer, for their families, for people who have survived cancer, for just to chat to point them in the right direction, to kind of refer them into Macmillan. And this is for me kind of it's really, really important. And actually, what we found with the pandemic, people weren't able to access the Boots Macmillan information pharmacist, which was a real problem for us. So this is where some of the technology comes into it, and we've talked about kind of remote consultations before. But we very, very quickly had to spin up the appointment diary, link it through to remote consultations, set up the infrastructure, and allow customers to go online. So you can go online through boots.com, book yourself a Macmillan information pharmacist appointment, and at the time go on to your laptop and have that conversation with somebody who's specially trained, who understands some of your needs and can kind of give life-saving advice in my opinion, and or help a family member who's struggling with a partner or a son or a daughter or a grandma who has cancer. So it kind of, from an IT perspective, it's really good to be involved in that, and that's something I kind of find in working for Boots, which is great. It's even in IT you get to be involved with some of this life-changing stuff and helping real people with real problems. So that again for me was kind of really important. The other one on there is as well, working with a partner, Livy. We could give access to remote GPs. So through boots.com you can go on, you can book a conversation with a remote GP. Anything you want to talk about, if you need a prescription, they'll prescribe you a prescription. We also did this in some of our stores, and this was slightly before the pandemic. So if you walk into a store, speak to a pharmacist, said, actually, I'm not quite able to do that, you need to go and speak to a GP, rather than sending you off to your GP or wherever, we could say, actually go into the consultation room, we've kitted it out with a webcam and all the kit you need. You could sit down there and then have a conversation with a GP, which is for acute conditions where you haven't got time to go to the GP, where the pharmacist isn't able to quite help you, there is an option for you. So that was something else we were kind of quite passionate about, and we delivered just before the pandemic, but it was kind of really important through the pandemic getting that access.
I've just segued you onto the online doctor.
Oh, you've moved me on. So this is a very similar example. This is more about. Okay.
Have you got that online doctor handy?
Absolutely. So this was as John talked about, rapidly expanding our ability to give our customers access to some more common drugs that you might need to access. So this one is not so much you have a remote consultation. This is you go through a questionnaire and you get something prescribed and it gets delivered to your home. We had a service of about 5 or 6 drugs pre-pandemic. We needed to get to kind of 40, 50. We wanted to expand our range quickly. In this case, this is about a partnership, right? So we selected a partner, we landed them quickly, we got it up and running kind of in a matter of weeks. We're now working with them really closely to kind of bring them back to this open architecture, as kind of Steve's talked about. So we landed them. Now we're trying to hook it back into the Boots estate. But we would never been able to land it in the speed and the agility that we did on our own. So that was where we said, actually, in this case, there's an urgent need. We see a partner that can do that. Let's bring them in, and then after that, we'll reshape it so it becomes part of the Boots journey.
Right, quickly moving on to the next one. Helpful. That's one.
Right, okay, so I think we're nearing the end. Again, very similar themes you're hearing all the way through this. This is again about access and availability to healthcare for our customers. And what we found is we can offer a certain amount of services within Boots. We can offer GP remote consultations with a third party, but there's a broader range of services that we want to be able to point our customers to. So when they come to Boots, they know they can get pointed in the right direction for whatever their healthcare needs. And this includes things like menopause support, this includes things like mental health support. And this isn't necessarily about Boots delivering those services, but creating a bit of a marketplace for those services. So what we're doing is partnering with third parties to put on a health marketplace. So I'd go to Boots and I can see are an array of services, some of them which Boots will deliver them, some of them which will be NHS deliver services, so we'll work with the NHS on that, some of them will be charities, some of them will be paid for services. So this is fairly new to us. We're delivering this marketplace and driven by the COVID pandemic around how do we best give our customers access to the healthcare that they need. And it's not just about what we as an organisation can deliver, it's about how do we partner with other organisations, put that in front of the customer in the right time, in the right way, and allow them access to that.
I want to ask possibly a slightly awkward question, but I think it plays to a challenge that a lot of organisations potentially have. So as we've walked through today, we've looked at lots of different propositions that Boots have, and two on those two last slides, Online Doctor and Health Hub.
Yeah.
If I sit here with my customer hat on, it's very difficult for me to tell those two propositions apart and to understand what Health Hub is versus what Online Doctor's doing. And I know, having been inside the organisation, that plays to some of our organisational structures and the way that's going to set up within Boots. How do you think, how are you going about tackling that as we kind of move forward?
So, give me an example of the kind of distinctions. Let's just say I've got physiotherapy requirements.
Yeah.
Through pandemic, can't access my physiotherapist for social distancing reasons, but I know my condition, my GP knows my condition, I know I need to have regular treatment. Through the Health Hub marketplace, we're able to offer online physio as an example, which would be specific to that patient, talk them through a treatment plan, face-to-face consultation about how they should exercise, how can they manage the condition to a point where they can go back into the mainstream service. So that's different to what online GP would do, because that would be about dispense medication, medical advice. This is about managing a condition.
So to challenge you on that, though, I think that's a really good answer. And what you've done there is you've described the internal organisational challenge that we've got in terms of two different parts of the Boots business responding to a customer proposition. What I would push back to you and say is, as a customer, I don't care. I want to turn up to the website and I want to say, I need some healthcare advice. And then Boots deals with that problem.
I think that's
fair. Sorry, just to say, there's another angle to this, is if I turn up to the Boots hub and, okay, you've got a partnership with some physio, let's say, is that physio branded as Boots Physio, or is they an independent organisation? So if I have an issue with that physio, I'm dealing with that physio, not to Boots. So then the question is, what's that trust relationship that then you have with your partners, which then translate to me recognising that this is a trusted physio as opposed to any dodgy physio that you've got to deal with, that you will walk away from if there's an issue.
And it plays to the problem that lots of organisations have got, right? It's not Boots specific, and even on the high street, you've got to select who your provider is going to be and what you're going to do.
And what's that trust relationship?
But I guess the reason for raising the question is that it plays to how we can give a joined up proposition to customers where you leverage the Boots brand in this case, or whatever brand you might be working with, while you're making sure that from the customer's point of view it feels joined up and connected with a true end-to-end journey, which is really difficult because for very good reasons you're trying to leverage agility by partnering with lots of organisations to deliver propositions. There's a clash there somewhere. I think it's really difficult for businesses to reconcile.
I think you're right. I think during the pandemic we had to kind of play what was in front of us, and we had to deliver propositions to the need as we saw them. But there is a need now, as kind of we're moving out, to look at what that total proposition should look like, and how do we even better bring that all together. So I would envisage a place where Health Hub, whatever you call it, I as a customer come to Boots and I present you with a load of options. Maybe I use questionnaires or risk assessments to say kind of what's the right thing for you, Andrew? Where do you need to go? And pull it together at a holistic customer level. And on your point of trust, it's a really important one. And the business spend a lot of time when they're looking at partners in due diligence. So it is something where, as an organisation, our brand, our trust is really important to us, and we do spend a lot of time with the clinical governance people, with the legal people, in due diligence with partners. There's always a level of there's always a level of risk there,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But you know, as an organisation, we are very hot on that, keen on that, because you know, our brand is really important.
Yeah.
We can't lose that trust with our customers.
Yeah, see, if you think about it in a couple of different ways. If you think about the NHS, the massive backlogs they've got, people requiring access to, say, things like pain management. You know, I've got a problem with my hip, the waiting list has went from 12 months, I'm now up to 24 months. What do I do in that time? People are seeking a need for advice to be able to make some informed decisions, but we all recognise the internet has a wealth of information, and it has a wealth of bad information in it. How do you sift through all of that in a way that you know you can take control of your medical condition? And that's what these range of services are about, is to connect trusted companies up that can help you manage your condition at a time when the NHS is struggling under some conditions at the moment.
And just to your point again, Steve, as somebody who's come from outside IT into IT, I think IT have a unique space to play, because we see right across the customer proposition, whether that's in Boots, whether that's beauty, whether that's pharmacy, whether that's opticians. Organisationally, there's not many areas that have that privilege to be able to see right across all the propositions. But with that privilege, I think, to your point, comes a bit of responsibility, because we see that entire end-to-end proposition from a customer. We've got a role to play in with our business in agitating for that customer experience. We can't let that just be a business-owned thing. That has to be a technology, IT responsibility as well. And we should never be the IT people over there. We have a responsibility to respond to the customer needs ourselves.
There's an interesting example, because I know with community equipment, which you'll obviously do a lot of, and then a lot of the time people who need the community equipment will end up dying, and they'll have all this community equipment, and it was always a big issue that there wasn't an appetite to recycle because there wasn't any money in it. I just wonder whether that's the sort of challenge that you looked
We
at.
certainly have a similar challenge when with medicines,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, I worked in stores where people have brought in literally, you know, a shopping trolley full of medicines, and you know, they've just been sitting on the shelf. And I think as a pharmacy profession and as an organisation, we have a bit of a responsibility there to make sure we're not wasting medicine. So if we can see a customer, a patient is kind of over-ordering, or you know, coming to us more often than they should be, you know, the doctor might spot that, but we as an organisation have a role to play in that space, because you know, the waste of medicines is a real problem for the NHS, and something that we could have a responsibility as a pharmacy profession and organisation, as I said, to deal with. Not so much in the kind of the community equipment. We don't do a whole load of work in that space, but definitely similar problem with medicines. And some of these medicines aren't cheap to the NHS.
So we've
Can I ask a question that's going in a different direction from what you've been talking about? You've mentioned a few times the words governance, and you've talked about agile and DevOps and so forth. And you know, you've just dealt with a portfolio of a large number of projects. And so I wonder what kind of transformation you've seen in the way the organisation does its business, in that it moves from, you know, a very sort of, because you're in a tightly constrained, regulated space. So how you've made that transition to a much more dynamic, rapid turnover, and how this has been dealt with within the governance structures and the culture and the leadership of the organisation as it was at that time. How that transformation has been achieved and accepted within the whole Boots organisation.
It's a good question. I would say not everybody was probably on the same page to start with. You got security teams are all about protecting the business, protecting customer data at all costs, and that caused a lot of friction about some of the technical designs. So we've had to kind of invest a lot of time and effort with our security teams to give them confidence that we can safely open our networks up, open our applications up, but also take advice and guidance about how they would want us to design the systems that allows us to get speed and agility. That took a lot of time and is still a continually developing discussion. I have to watch our Chief Information Security Officer could be watching this. Hi, Jim. But that's taken a lot of time. We've had to kind of coach the organisation quite a lot through it. We've got service teams who are just want to protect and minimise change in the systems and are frightened to see, hey, we've got another 4 changes we're going to put in next week. How do we give them confidence that we're really testing these systems? And if you've seen the technical slide I put up earlier on about using some of the tech like Kubernetes, all the containerisation, how do we bundle up in a way that we're really confident that software is actually going to do what it needs to do. So we've had to put major investment in our test systems, redesign a lot of our architecture underpinnings to show that what we built actually operates in the way it needs to do. It's actually taken a lot of organisational change in our business model as well. So we talk about product management, and Andrew and the team here are probably a lot closer to that, is really how do we get a mindset in the business about value, backlogs, how do we get the right, build the right things at the right time? I know you've spent a lot of time in the DPI and DPS space. I don't know if you have any examples.
Yeah, no, I think there is more now a culture of allowing teams to make decisions more quickly. When it comes to product management approach, that is essential, right? You can't be going up through a whole level of governance. So I have seen kind of over the past, I mean, I've been in Boots 22 years, and I've definitely seen a shift in kind of how our leadership is starting to view product management, product ownership, delegation of authority. COVID just kind of accelerated all that, but that change was already starting to happen. And you know, I've definitely seen kind of within our business and within our exec team, there's definitely a hunger for transformation and an eagerness to transform rapidly, and that permeates through the organisation, and that plays into the hands of an agile organisation. And
Can
there's
I
more to
just
do, but absolutely.
interrupt you for one second? We have one more
All right.
question that did come in, and I'm just conscious of time. So in 30 seconds or less, did we do anything jointly with Walgreens during this time, or was the challenge in the USA different?
There was definitely collaboration work across the space, so things like our health hub we talked about. We did have some similarities on things like COVID testing devices. There wasn't a huge amount of crossover, I would say, though. A lot of it was very specific to the NHS and the NHS response, less probably to more of a private regional market that's in the US.
But the health hub was a good example because that was an application already in use in Walgreens, and we kind of lifted it and shifted it and brought it over to the UK, rebranded it, changed it. But that is one of the benefits of a global organisation. You can kind of look at what other areas have and bring it over.
Just think about the question in a slightly different context. One of the reasons we went down third-party routes is to break some of that governance model down. We can move faster, we're flexible with a third party, and then we can retrofit later on. I would say the retrofitting is going to prove to be a challenge because it has, the speed we moved at has left technical debt across the estate where we may have duplicated capabilities that are sitting across some technical stacks. You've already seen Libby Connect or our online doctor, you could say it's not one and the same, but they are two separate solutions for different purposes, so we need to work through that as well. But it's also introduced other challenges, things like our single login experience for the patient coming to all services. We have multiple platforms with multiple logins. So for the governance of architecture, we had to let go for a period of time so we could land it. Now we're in a period of reflection and resetting that so we can get it back into more enterprise grade solutions. We have to kind of work our way through that over the next 12 months.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that there was that hunger already in place to enable change and transformation, and probably if that had not been there, you wouldn't, we're talking about a different kind of boots now altogether. You might not have come through this quite as well as your presentation is indicating.
You can see other, we're a pharmacy and a retailer, but you can see other retailers without that kind of pressing need to transform and kind of what you can see what's happened to them. So that was already this is just accelerated, I think, kind of a bit more.
There was definitely a sense of we're in it together with the NHS, and I'm sure everybody else in the UK was in the same place. So it was roll up the sleeves, we're going to help them at all costs. We didn't even think about budgets or costs and how much it was going to cost boots. This was about helping the nation, and we really got behind it. The technical teams, without shadow of a doubt, were all in that place. There's a few things we probably shortcutted that we probably in reflection probably didn't want to do, but you know, on the whole, the teams really stepped up and managed to do it, but only through the success with a lot of partnerships. Apologies, we ran over a good 10 minutes.
A last question. I mean, next week it will be the end of COVID rules. Are you ready for the next challenge? Because definitely we'll have some cases will go up.
Absolutely. I would say, without shadow of a doubt, it's left the operating model design that we will continue developing on it. And we'll work really close with the NHS. They have no other challenges that they need to address now. The huge waiting lists on the operations, the clinical care, the cancer treatment, they need support, and we're going to be side by side together.
And that's what I was saying, kind of utilisation of the pharmacist workforce becomes even more important. You've got that backlog. If we can prove we can help with that backlog, or what's the lasting application of the pharmacist workforce and pharmacist profession.
Well, thank you for your time. Apologies for keeping you a bit late.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say thank you for our audience, and we have a discount for non-BCS member. If you use the code BCS CH20, you'll get 20% off as a discount. Steve, would you put it in the chat?
I have done, and I'm doing it again, yes.
Yeah. Our next event, we have 2 events next month. One is going to be on the 25th, and I think the other one on the 23rd, and I'm going to send emails about that. Thank you for attending, and thank you for booths.
Thank you for joining us.